r/no sleep. Posted by you/02321. I work as a CSI. Part 4. Some days are harder than others. Previous parts video link in description. Please check out friends. In a very short amount of time, I found out that not only supernatural creatures were real, but they also needed a CSI. I debated whether I wanted to accept their job offer. The extra income was the main factor that swayed my choice. A handful of cases were sent to my email along with the amount each job paid. I gained a bonus if I trained a few agents while working on the job. Since there were so many cases to cover, I doubted that having more people trained in my skills would ever dip into my income. When I asked about this job, I had been told that I would be working on scenes that could have been done by a human, or a creature. However, the first deaths I documented could only be committed by a monster. After all, I'd been requested to look over the deaths of torn apart creatures. A human could not do such damage to these bodies. I'd worked with a few agents and taught them as well as I could. Each of the ones I met went by a different number instead of a name, and they all looked very similar. At least they were good listeners. They have gotten a lot of recent cases of monsters killed with organs removed, or their bodies with other pieces missing. The agents I worked with told me that the body parts of monsters hold power. An organ could be turned into a weapon or a medicine. Sometimes creatures just eat the part of the body to gain a boost, but body parts are more effective after they're processed. I taught these agents a trick of putting Vapo Rub under your nose to help with the smell of decay while working. In exchange for that tip, they told me a little bit about how their world worked. I was stepping into this entire thing blind, so I wouldn't understand much for a very long time. Our world is mostly based on favors. Killing a creature and taking parts of them is very disrespectful if it was done by another creature. An agent told me as he kneeled by a mangled corpse. The monster of the day looked to be a mixture of a bird and a fox. The body is as big as a car with most of the insides torn out. He was taking photos and trying his best to get as much coverage as possible. He went by a pretty big number of 10,006. I just called him 6 to save time. I also asked him if he really had over 10,000 brothers. He confirmed it, but he wasn't aware of how many were still alive. That number could be in the low hundreds. Don't you creatures kill and eat humans all the time? I asked and directed him to some places of interest to document. He looked human. Jackalope did as well. A lot of these monsters held a human appearance, but others looked too terrifying to remain sane after encountering them. That's different. Most of the ones who kill and eat humans know you don't follow the same cultures as us. Only the jerks would try and make you uphold favors and deals if you didn't understand it beforehand. It can get pretty complicated to understand if you're not living in this world. A creature may feel it fair to kill another if that one set foot on its territory. They see it as the other creature who breathed their air and lived because of it, and that means they could take their life. Some monsters tend to twist words around to get their way. 6 explained the best he was able. I tried to wrap my head around it. If I came across a very bad monster, just looking or speaking to it may trap me in an unsuspected deal. Or if I came across a creature that only saw me as a meal instead of an equal to take something from, I would get eaten. So, monsters just eat humans instead of being complicated about it? I slowly asked. Some, yeah, 6 agreed and went back to taking photos. I suddenly worried about what kind of job I took and the kind of world I stumbled into. The agent didn't appear to notice my distress and we worked together to finish the scene. His theory was a hunter, or a poacher attacked the creature we documented. I needed to have 6 explain the difference. There is another company made up of only humans that track down creatures to kill them. They use magic, so it would make sense why they took organs from this creature. Most likely they wanted to create a weapon to hunt down more of the supernatural. Hunters kill anything not natural out of hatred. Poachers do so for money. They'll only kill if it's profitable. 6 explained, not sounding too bothered by the fact some humans hunted his kind. Doesn't the corporation do something about the hunters? I asked. A noise drew my attention to the woods. A set of deep yellow eyes stared back at us through the trees, making me jump. It was clear some sort of monster was watching us. I raised my camera as a poor defense in case the thing rushed over to attack us. A snout very similar to the dead creature we were investigating came out. After a few sniffs, the thing retreated into the woods. I breathed a little easier but wasn't able to fully relax. Don't worry. Those creatures won't attack you while you're with us. And no, the corporation doesn't stop the hunters most of the time. To be honest, it's all above my pay grade. They work together when needed and both know of each other's movements. I know that the hunters have killed agents or tried to ruin the corporation, but there was never proof. Or they claimed a Rouge hunter was the cause, 6 said, and knew we were almost finished with the scene. I wished I had a larger crew to work on scenes like this. The numbered agents worked hard even if they didn't fully know the job yet. Each of them learned quickly. 6 seemed to pick up what to do the fastest and spoke the most. He acted very friendly and didn't wear the sunglasses all of his brothers did. His eyes are blue, but so dull they looked like they should belong to a dead man. Even with unnerving eyes, I liked talking with him. Are you alright with that? I mean, you don't sound angry that they've killed your coworkers. And maybe some of your brothers. Shouldn't you be kind of upset a little about the fact they hunt you down even though you're working to save humans from creatures? I said and helped him start to pack up our gear. He thought about the questions for a few moments. He shook his head, his soft expression never fading. 6 wasn't as stern as his brothers. I wondered why that was but didn't ask. No, I get it. The hunters formed because they hate creatures. Some creatures hunt for food. Others for fun. And others because they can. It's impossible for humans to only kill the ones who hunt for food. And it's impossible for creatures to only eat bad humans. Even bad humans have people who care about them. The hunters decided to try and kill all of the supernatural creatures because they don't see any of us as equal. I don't agree with that outlook, but I understand it, 6 said, and he never lost his kind tone. I've tried to think about all of that since I found out about the whole monsters eating humans thing. It really seemed like there was no fully moral option for both sides. Monsters needed to eat, but there weren't enough murderers and other violent criminals to support their populations. And I knew the legal system didn't get it right all the time. Supernatural creatures might eat someone innocent locked away for a murder they didn't commit. I bet that no matter how hard they tried, the hunters would never be able to kill a dark god like the one who caused the clipped body cases. I was lost in thought when 6 spoke up. You're living with Jackalope, right? He said out of the blue. I knew Jackalope had been an agent, but didn't know who he worked with in the past. I nodded and 6 went on. We've done a few jobs. He always treated me nicely. How has he been doing? Is he smiling a lot? The agent asked, and I felt a small pain of guilt in my chest. Jackalope hadn't been smiling that much lately. He forced one on his face when he saw I was looking in his direction. I was the cause of that. The trauma of what that god did to him had yet to fade. I doubted he would ever fully heal. I wanted to lie to 6 but figured it was best to admit how my friend was doing. No. Not as often. I admitted. For some reason, 6 smiled at the answer. I think that's alright. Jackalope did it a lot for work as smiling was a tool. I'd hoped that he would feel comfortable enough to show some different expressions someday. I never considered that. Jackalope was a bit of a different person when we met. He acted more subdued after he moved in, and I just assumed it was because of what happened. It was possible he no longer felt pressured to keep a certain act up. I considered talking to him about this, but much later after he got more settled in. Just as we finished cleaning up, 6 got a call asking for him to go on a job. I was free to go for the day. He thanked me for the help, and I thanked him for what information he gave that day. Most of the time the emails for the jobs listed what agent I may be working with. I decided I wanted to work with 6 more even if that meant accepting lower paid jobs. I could always take the bigger paydays after I talked with him a bit more. I told him to be careful on his next job, which caused 6 to give me an odd look. I wondered if that had been the first time someone ever said those words to him. I really needed to start treating these agents nicer. Their lives seemed pretty terrible from what I'd seen so far. When I got home, I got changed right away and went into the shower. The smell of all those dead creatures stuck to my clothing. Since I started working in the field, I bought cheaper clothing that could be thrown out if the smells couldn't be washed out. The outfit for today had a few more jobs in them. While I was in the shower, Jackalope came home. He normally checked up on Pesto and then got started making dinner when he finished work. To be honest, I tended to order food in rather than cook. Or I just skipped meals depending on how bad the scene smelled that day. I already gained a little bit of weight since Jackalope moved in. I never noticed how thin I'd been until I started to look healthier in the mirror. I stood in the doorway watching him work away. I've offered to help, but he refused, saying he liked cooking. And I usually messed up dinner so badly it's a miracle I hadn't burned down the house yet. I worked with 6 today. He asked about you. I told him, forgetting that I'd been the one to give the agent a nickname. Jackalope paused to look over his shoulder, trying to place who I'd been talking about. He knew 6 was a numbered agent but wasn't certain which one. 10,006. I corrected myself. His expression cleared with a smile. The small grin was not the same kind of emotion I'd seen from him when he first sat on my couch. He no longer acted like an agent, but sometimes I still saw traces of the person he'd been forced to be. He's one of the youngest numbered agents. We only worked together a handful of times. I'm surprised he remembered me. What did he want to know? Jackalope asked and turned back to making dinner. He'd found the knife sharpener buried under other kitchen where I neglected to organize after my mother passed away. With a sharp blade, he didn't need to hold onto the vegetables to be able to cut them. But he tended to dice food slowly and unevenly, which was to be expected. He wanted to know if you're still smiling, I said, deciding not to lie to him. And what did you say? He asked back, not pausing in his work. I told him the truth. You are, but not as often. He liked that. My new roommate stopped cutting the vegetables for a few seconds. He turned the words around in his head. When he started back up dicing, I could tell he liked the answer. He'd been worried about how other agents thought of him after he got fired. They might not all be friends, but on jobs, they needed to rely on each other. All of them wanted respect from their coworkers. I never thought about how much the idea of the other agents not respecting Jackalope could upset him. He did his best to hide his worries and wasn't the kind of person to ever talk about what ate away at him. He protected a human and paid a heavy price because of it. If anyone thought less of him for his actions, then he didn't need to care about anything that kind of person might have to say. I didn't feel very hungry that night because of what I needed to deal with during the day. Somehow Jackalope tricked me into eating something before going to bed. I packed up the leftovers for lunch the next day. If I did a tamer scene, I would be able to take a break and eat. If it was a bad scene, then I would give my lunch to the agent I worked with that day. I quickly found out all of them liked free food but loved Jackalope's cooking more. A few of them may get jealous over the fact I wanted to work with Six more often now. The next day I got an email near noon asking to cover a scene at a campground. I saw Six's number and accepted. I found myself in the middle of the woods with the agent within the hour. The job description was fairly vague about the details. Six helped unload the gear but wasn't going to help document the scene that day. Instead, he stood watch. His dull eyes trained on the woods and hand on a small dagger at his waist. The air tense between us. I still risked speaking as I got started working, careful not to disturb the trash around the small campsite we arrived at. What's up with this job? I don't know much about it, I said while taking note of the smaller details so as not to miss anything. The fire pit was still fresh. Maybe only a few hours old. I bet if I dug around some embers still remained. The tent had been torn apart with some blood staining the edges. The campers' items were scattered everything. Most of it was damaged. If I didn't know better, I would say this was some sort of animal attack. The torn tent looked to be ruined by claws. For some reason. Bits of trash littered around the scene. I didn't know the debris had been here when they set up camp, or they were just very messy. Some campers heard a scream in the middle of the night. They were half asleep and only remembered it in the morning. They came by this camp and saw all of this. They called the rangers, who called the police. Six explained, sounding oddly serious compared to yesterday. I'll need to record what shoes everyone who came by this scene was wearing and where they stepped, I told him, wondering what kind of mess we walked into. Already requested. We have some detectives working for us on cases like these. They can help gather evidence and do interviews with suspects. That answer brought up more questions. It felt like nowadays I was just always asking for more information. I really lacked enough knowledge of the supernatural world and how the corporation functioned. Did the police call you guys to take over once they knew this wasn't a natural case? I pressed. A wind blew, causing a scrap of tarp caught in a nearby tree to wave. The sound made me jump. I thought it was something watching us. Documenting all this trash was going to be annoying. But necessary. You never knew what may be important to a case and needed to record everything. No, they're mad we took it over and kicked them out of the woods. There was another set of campers that disappeared 2 weeks ago. No bodies were ever found. The corporation keeps an eye on all recorded cases and will only send out agents if there is a high chance of something supernatural being the culprit. There are far too many cases for the current amount of agents to deal with. Six admitted. He kept looking around in the trees as if expecting something to jump out. His grip was so tight on his weapon, his knuckles turned white. Aside from those small signs, he didn't show how stressed he felt. I wondered what about this case made them certain some sort of creature had been behind it to act so quickly. I didn't know how long the police started to investigate the woods before they were removed. As far as I could tell, this didn't stand out as too odd of a death. I then didn't like the idea of seeing 2 people disappearing in the middle of the night assumed dead as a minor case. These were people and I started to act as if it wasn't too big of a deal. I've been working a bit too much lately. What about this stands out? I'll need to know what kind of supernatural things to look for in future cases, I said to the tense agent. There is a mixture of a lot of things. No bodies normally mean they were eaten. Forests tend to be a hunting ground for a lot of different creatures. He replied. He started walking a little to try to ease some stress. 6 moved very carefully not to disturb the scene in areas I hadn't fully recorded yet. If a candy wrapper blew in front of his path, he very carefully stepped over it. I really wanted a crew for this. More people could cover the area faster, and I risked missing something. Plus, I couldn't control the wind or other elements that may disturb evidence before I got to it. Do creatures hunt in the woods because it's easier to hide from humans? I asked, still working away. 6 nodded without stopping his pacing, fearing he may step on some evidence. The wind started to pick up, kicking around leaves and other items. At least the campsite was relatively enclosed, so the litter couldn't get very far. That, and a few other reasons. They're attracted to the magic that leaks from living creatures. A forest has plants, animals, and insects, so more magic than a city. But some creatures are attracted to cities to hunt regardless of if it's riskier or not. Magic? I paused, working to turn that word over in my head. Of course, there was magic. How else did that god stick people into objects? For some reason, I never really thought about it until that point. Somehow, I saw a short man with rabbit features as something natural. Magic explained everything odd I'd come across, and yet my brain didn't want to believe it was real. That was another topic I needed to ask about. Living creatures have magic? Even natural ones? I pestered. It was hard getting all of this straight into my head as well as documenting the scene. If this turned out to be a supernatural creature, then I needed to know as much as possible. Knowledge normally leads to more evidence getting discovered while in the field. Yes. But it's a very small amount. Most say humans don't have any internal magic because you can't use the power most of the time. And it's such a small amount it barely counts. 6 started to explain. How small are we talking about? He stopped walking to gather his thoughts. He crossed his arms for a few seconds to figure out an example that may work. Let's use stars in the sky. A human may have 1 star. 5 or 10 at the most. I'm a fairly weak creature, but I still would have at least 5,000 stars worth of magic. He explained. I considered the difference in power level between us. I wasn't really aware of what magic could do, but it was clear that the more of it was better. There was such a vast difference between us, even though 6 admitted to being weak. If a tree had the same amount of magic as a human, I understood why creatures would be drawn to the woods. Hell, even if every insect had half the amount of magic that humans possessed, then it still added up to a massive amount inside any forest. What about Lupa? How much does he have? And what's the strongest creature out there? I assume gods should be loaded. 6 gave a smile at my question. As nervous as he felt about us being in the woods with the possibility of some sort of monster lurking around, he was glad for the conversation as a distraction. Lupa is pretty strong. All the office directors are. He may be somewhere between 500,000 stars, and near to 1 million. The difference between his strength and my own is massive. Gods are nearly impossible to fully understand their powers to gauge it. And for the strongest creature, that would be the Silver King. His strength would be equal to every star in the sky that has ever existed and shall ever come into existence. That magic is endless, and we all owe our lives to him. Since you're human, you'll never truly understand how much creatures of the night love and fear him, he said. His tone was very hard to read. The expression on the agent's face froze the blood in my veins. Out there somewhere was a monster that went beyond the dark god that took a part of Jackalope. What I experienced trying to answer a simple question was nothing compared to what ruled over the entire supernatural world. I prayed I was too far beneath the king's notice for us to ever come into contact. The sound of the tarp blowing against a tree drew my attention over to it. 6 tensed again. His hand was ready to draw his weapon. I wished I had a gun, or something to protect myself. When I started working, I was given a windbreaker with some forms to sign. It had a simple CSI on the back and nothing else. I was told that the jacket held some protective power, but not much. Since I would be working with agents, the corporation didn't want to waste resources on a more powerful jacket when I sort of have bodyguards. I trusted 6 to do his best if something came out of the woods. But I found myself worrying about him. He did appear to be an adult, but the longer I looked at him the younger he looked. 6. How old are you? I wasn't sure why I asked such a question. He was confused over the question. At first, I thought I asked something too personal. It soon became clear he was just thinking hard about the answer, as if he really didn't know. I think this is going to be my 3rd summer. The numbered agents are born as something not human. We're placed inside a deceased human body and fused together with it. I've gained some memories of the one I took over, but only general things. I don't know whose body this was, and I haven't experienced most of what I know. I stared over at him, shocked. He was only 3 years old. It didn't feel real. I understood what he was saying but didn't want to accept it. 6 was too damn young to be out here fighting monsters and trying to act like an adult. I dreaded the idea that he had been working as an agent for all 3 of those years. Seriously, what was up with their world? Did he not have a childhood at all? I stopped working long enough for him to notice. I forced myself to go back to documenting and bagging items, but my thoughts tore into my heart. Did Jackalope go through the same thing? He wasn't a numbered agent, so not a part of their family. But I guessed his life was the same as theirs. He may have just started working the moment he was able. A sound much like a twig snapping came from the woods. I shot up to look around as 6 pulled the dagger from his belt. I watched in shock as he flipped the dagger in his hand and the blade shifted into a revolver in the middle of the swift movement. I was still new at seeing magic in motion. Even something as small as a weapon changing was a bit amazing to me. He held the gun up, ready to fire. When he didn't see or hear anything, he let his hand drop to his side and finger off the trigger. "Neat magic dagger," I commented after my heart slowed down a little. The bullets are weaker than the magic that gets torn into the target if you stab it. But it's useful to both have a long-range and short-range weapon. 6 admitted with a nervous smile. I half listened to what he was saying. Something in the trees caught my attention and I focused on it. The human brain has a trait for seeing faces or objects in random patterns. Like seeing a cloud as some sort of animal, or the face of Jesus on burnt toast. I've heard the theory it's helped our ancestors by them assuming every tree branch in the grass is a snake because sometimes, it is a snake that could kill them. When I arrived at the campsite, I thought I saw the tarp as something it was not. A body of some sort of animal hiding behind the trees. As I looked up at the leaves, an odd image caught my eye. At first, I thought the bark of the tree looked like half a face staring down at us. Because I stared at it for so long trying to convince my brain it was nothing, I saw the creature before 6. He looked in the same direction but didn't notice the same thing I had. The monster realized I was staring right at it. The half face in the trees moved and I shouted at 6 that something was coming our way. He flew into action, no longer caring about stepping over the crime scene. Our lives were more important than evidence. He raised his gun but wasn't able to get a clear line of sight until it was too late. The thing came from the trees, body making so many sounds as it came down on us. The same sounds we've been hearing since we got here. I was pushed out of the way at the last second as the monster wrapped a massive body around my agent friend before he got a shot off. His gun getting tossed from his hand as he was slammed against a tree so hard, I heard bones snapping. I shouted out his name and that got the creature's attention. That gruesome face turned in my direction, causing me to stop breathing from fear. The monster's head was made up of 4 parts of human faces stretched and melded together. The open mouths made up the eyes, and the mouth was just an open hinge. The teeth made up of broken glass, bones, and twigs. The blue tarp made up most of the long body. The thing was very much like a centipede made up of a mixture of trash and plant matter of the rest of the human victims it claimed. 4 human ribcages hung from the tarp, some with still fresh blood clinging to the bones. The smell of rot became overpowering when the direction of the wind changed. I became so frozen in fear I couldn't move. The monster came down, but I got saved yet again by 6 who shoulder checked the creature out of the way. It let out an ungodly screech as it rolled along the ground. The body picked up the pieces of trash as it rolled. Any damage 6 could do would be recovered by the amount of garbage around us. I looked for his weapon. I spotted it far too late. Arms took hold of the agent. Each arm is either from the humans it killed or made of pieces of solid trash. He forced down a cry of pain, refusing to let me hear how much trouble he was in. "Carlos, run," 6 shouted, his voice cracking. I froze yet again, unsure of what to do. I couldn't do anything to help. And yet I refused to let another person get hurt to save my life. 6 struggled the best he could. His face started to change into something inhuman. The skin on his hands burst to show a white set of claws underneath. With strength I didn't think he had, he tore through the hands, keeping him captive. The trash monster screamed in 4 voices at once. A set of large claws broke through 6's shoes. His legs now looked much like a set that should belong to an insect. His mouth went from ear to ear, and his eyes were now large and dark. I dove for his gun, feeling the cold metal in my hand. I should have made a run for it, but I wasn't thinking properly at that moment. At first, it seemed like 6 gained the upper hand with his new transformation. He jumped and caught the creature along the side. His claws tore through, spilling out litter from the body. He landed on his feet, ready for another attack. I shouted out a warning, at the same time another set of powerful hands grabbed at him. They tore through his chest, and I helplessly watched. I raised the gun and fired. It caught the creature in the face but didn't do that much damage. The recoil of the gun hurt my hands like hell. For a small weapon, it should not have hurt that much. I refused to drop it. The monster tossed 6 aside and came down on me. The thing caught my leg, lifting my body to slam my back against a tree, stunning me for a few seconds. My eyes flood with tears from the pain. The jacket protected my ribs from being broken, but I felt a snap coming from my ankle. When I opened my eyes again, I was face to face with countless lines of teeth. All of them were ready to come down on my head. I searched through my mind trying to think of what to do. The gun would not do enough damage to kill this monster, and I didn't know how to switch it back to the dagger. Instinct guided my hand. Along with something else. I wasn't aware of it, but the forest wanted this creature dead. It was ready to offer up power to do so, but couldn't act on its own. If my will faltered even in the slightest, that power would have been blown back into my face, killing me regardless of if this creature ate me or not. A force surged at my back. A warm, encouraging feeling joined with my single purpose. I did want to live, but I wanted to protect 6 even more. Without thinking, I shoved my arm into the monster's mouth. The teeth cut my bare hand holding the gun. I took a breath and fired the gun once. A burst of power that was not my own came from the weapon, tearing through the body from the inside. A pale green light exploded outwards, destroying most of the creature's body besides some parts of the humans it took. I collapsed, my hand bleeding like crazy and shaking. Waves of pain came from my ankle, but I ignored the feeling to stand up. I stumbled over to 6 and got beside him. Blood poured from his chest and his breathing was raspy. I almost broke down. It was hard to fight through all the emotions, to dig through his suit pockets to find his phone to call for help. I don't know how long we stayed there for. It may have only been a few minutes. I took a hold of his hand, refusing to leave him. "Hey kiddo, you'll be right. Help is on the way, you'll be fine," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know if he could hear my words. The blood stained his pale face and white shirt. Finally, others showed up to collect us. It took a lot for them to separate us. In a blur of motion, I found us inside a hospital, and they needed to pry my hand from his to take me into a different room to be treated. My injuries were mild. Since I now worked for a supernatural company, they had ways of healing wounds faster than normal. My hand and ankle were wrapped in some bandages I was told to leave on for 3 days. I also was ordered to stay off my foot, which I immediately refused to do so. I paced outside my room demanding to know how 6 was doing. I wanted to be right with him the moment he woke up. I wasn't even aware of how I looked. My front was covered in both of our blood, and my clothing covered in dirt from the fight. Because I refused to listen to anyone, they brought in the big guns to get me to go home. A short man came down the hallway, his soft paws silently walking across the floor. He stopped in front of me, but I still refused to stop moving. It felt like if I stood still, 6 would die. "The agent is alive. He'll recover, but we are unsure of his future with the corporation." Lupa spoke in an even tone. Rage flared through my body. He stormed over to him and took his collar in my hand. I knew he was far more powerful than myself, and yet I didn't care. Why was it just us out there? 6 could have died. You should have had another agent just in case. We do not have enough agents for just in case situations. Lupa cut into my rant before I got too far. That simple fact deflated my anger. I suddenly felt drained and needed to sit down. I slowly sank to my knees, feeling dizzy and sick. To his credit, Lupa didn't comment on my weakness. "Take some time off to recover, and to decide if this job is suited for you," the man said sternly. He turned on his heel and left me alone in the hallway, debating all my choices so far. Some kind staff members took me home. I was in such a state of shock I didn't know what to do the moment I walked through the front door. My eyes fell to the shoe rack because a certain color caught my eye. Jackalope's work shoes sat on top of a plastic bag covered in blood. Panic rose through me, and I charged into the living room to find him sitting on the floor watching Pesto hop about. The bottom of his pant leg stained with blood, but he was uninjured. His face flew into the same panic as I felt when he saw my clothing covered in a deep red. "It's not mine," I croaked out, trying to calm him down. That relaxed him enough to pause getting up from the floor. I sat next to him, still too much in shock to do anything else. Jackalope was an agent. He knew days like this happened. "Your shoes?" I started, unsure of how to ask what happened to him that day. "Delivering mail to monsters gets messy some days." "It's fine," he said, but sounded exhausted. I did a double take over what he said, which made him give me a strange look. "Monsters?" I asked slowly. I knew he got a job delivering mail but didn't know he dealt with monsters. The more I thought about it, the more sense it made. "I told you they fixed my eyesight. Did you think that was done through regular means with no recovery time?" He answered in a light voice. "Well, UPS or FedEx is a big company. I thought maybe. I started trying to defend myself. Carlos, Jackalope said gently. I found myself blushing from embarrassment. This entire time I assumed he worked with humans. At least he was kind enough not to laugh over my mistake. We'll buy you new shoes tomorrow. Is there anything else you need? I said quickly, trying to change the topic. He knew not to ask me about my day. I would tell him when I felt ready, and he would do the same. He thought for a while and finally looked over, sounding like a child asking for an expensive Christmas gift. Can we get a friend for Pesto? I know it's a lot to ask for another animal, but I feel bad he's alone all day while we're at work. I don't know what kind of horrors he saw that day, and yet he was worried about a rabbit. I smiled, which I didn't think I had the expression me that day. We'll look into it. I want to make sure we know how to introduce a new rabbit and if Pesto wants a friend. I told him. When I was a child, we had a few cats. I knew that some animals you couldn't just toss together and expected everything to be fine. I didn't want to put Pesto into a stressful situation when we just wanted to do what was best for him. Jackalope nodded in agreement, his smile something I was glad to see after the day I went through. We sat for a long time trying to process what happened. It wasn't just our jobs, but everything we'd been through in such a short amount of time. He shifted trying to get comfortable and his hand brushed against mine. On reflex, I took it. We're still here. I told him, unaware of why I felt the need to say it. He nodded, needing to hear those words. After everything, we were still there. And that's all that mattered at the end of days like this. He didn't force me to eat something that night. I showered and tossed my clothing out. He did the same after me, and we both went to bed early, unsure if we could even sleep that night. I hated being in the dark after encountering that god. But I felt as if I slept with a light on, that would be letting him win. I tossed in bed, feeling far too cold under my blankets. I refused to open my eyes to look out into my dark bedroom, fearing I may see something staring back at me. I think I slept for a few hours. The exhaustion finally caught up to me. When I woke up, I felt even more tired than when I drifted off to sleep. A soft sound of footsteps came from the hallway, making me sit up in bed. I thought I had closed my door, and yet I saw a figure walking down the hallway to stop just before my door. I wasn't scared because I recognized the silhouette. Jackalope? What's wrong? Having issues sleeping? I asked in a tired voice. His form appeared black from the small amount of light coming from his open door. Since he moved in, he hadn't once gotten out of bed after dark. Seeing him at my door was strange. Can I sleep with you? The voice came from the figure. It sounded like Jackalope, but fear tore through my blood. This wasn't him. I was either having a nightmare, or something else got into my house. The shape noticed I knew something wasn't right. Two blue flames appeared as eyes in the dark. The figure started to make a run towards my bed, the footsteps heavy with laughter that mixed in. I launched myself towards my bedside table and flicked on my lamp. The light covered the room, and the moment it turned on, the figure disappeared as if it was never there. Breathing heavily, I scanned the room. I then flew out of bed to turn on every light in the house. Jackalope somehow slept through the entire event. There wasn't any way I could go back to bed after what I saw. My theory was that Dark God wasn't done with us yet. I could have rented a room somewhere for us, but I assumed a god could follow us anywhere. Until I could get a hold of someone in the corporation to help, I decided there was no harm in keeping the lights on at night. I work as a CSI. Part 5. Don't think about what lurks in the dark. I'd been told to stay off my feet after a rough job. I'd refused the advice and went shopping with Jackalope the day after I nearly died. Being out of the house helped me take my mind off things. I hadn't told Jackalope about the dark figure I saw the night before yet. When the sun rose, I doubted what I saw was real when I woke up. I didn't want to worry my roommate until I knew for certain something supernatural was going on, or I might just be losing it. I needed some new clothing I could toss if they got too stained on jobs. And Jackalope needed new shoes. Being an agent, he only wore black polished dress shoes. Now, he had some freedom. He got some pairs of white slip-on shoes. At first, I started to suggest some sneakers that may be easy on his feet if he was going to be moving all day at work. I soon noticed my mistake. With only one hand, doing up the laces maybe hard got him. I offered to help with small tasks he found difficult but didn't want to fully take away his independence. So far, the only thing Jackalope felt comfortable with me helping with was tying his hair back in the morning. We fell into a routine of me doing his hair after we both brushed our teeth. I wondered why he didn't cut it short after he lost his arm. It would have been easier for him to keep his hair tidy, but he may not like how he looked with it cut. Then again, I didn't think he placed much care into his appearance. The shoulder length of his hair was a mystery I didn't ask about. It wasn't overly important. And he did like his new co-workers complimenting on what hair tie we picked out for the day. Since I went shopping, I stressed out my ankle. I wasn't aware it had been broken due to whatever magic bandages keeping the pain away. I got scolded and ordered to stay at home for an entire week. At that time, we adopted another rabbit. This one 2 years old and named Houdini. There was a chance that the two wouldn't get along. Those worries were quickly gone after they started to sleep next to each other after 2 days. I was extremely bored at home. Since keeping night lights on in every room, I hadn't seen anything odd at night. Jackalope was gone for most of the day. When he got home, he made dinner and enough for lunch the next day. He didn't want me walking around the kitchen trying to make something or spending too much on takeout. At this rate, I was actually going to be at a healthy weight for my height. My house arrest finally ended. I went to the same corporation-run hospital that treated my injuries to be given the all-clear to work. I'd also been constantly bothering them for updates on Six's condition. He'd gotten so hurt on the last scene we worked on, and no one was telling me much. They said he was recovering well but refused to let me see him. I didn't know if that meant he wasn't ready for visitors or didn't want to upset me by seeing him still bedridden. I went home feeling bitter and overly angry over the entire thing. I desperately wanted to talk to him. Even for a few minutes. But I didn't know if that was what I wanted, or something Six needed. I walked into the living room and my bad mood faded. I stared at Jackalope holding both rabbits in 2 hands, a bright smile on his face. I swiftly walked over to him to see if I was just seeing things or if he really had another arm out of the blue. He carefully put down the bunnies and let me take his new hand in mine to look it over. It's a fake one. I didn't want to tell you about getting it because there was a chance it wouldn't stick. There is still a possibility of my body rejecting it, but I feel fine. He told me, clearly excited but holding back just how happy he felt. Delivering mail seemed to come with really good benefits. The new arm was covered by his job. I didn't know how it was fake because it felt very real. The arm bled if you cut it and Jackalope refused to say what it was made of, claiming I did not want to know. I dropped the questioning, not wanting to overwhelm him. For once, things seemed to be going well for us. The next morning, I started to do his hair on reflex. He didn't stop me. It made me wonder if the reason why he didn't cut his hair was that he enjoyed someone doing it for him. At least one routine didn't change with his new arm. An email for a job request came in and I was a bit nervous about going to work. Mostly because I knew I risked death every time I went into the field. But also, because that meant I wouldn't be able to force Jackalope to stay home. The new arm came with risks. If his body rejected it, he could die unless he got treatment right away. He should be taking it easy and resting until he knew for certain there would be no issues with the false arm he was given. There should be some recovery time, and yet he was dressed in his uniform ready for work. I'll be fine. It's better if I use it. It helps it get stronger. I swear if I start feeling off, I'll go to the clinic to have it looked at. Jackalope promised as he got his shoes on ready to leave. The urge to make him stay home was just my own concerns getting the better of me. I knew that. And yet I still made him promise 5 times he would call me when he had the chance during the day. He humored my fretting. I think he was also worried about me working again, so us calling each other for checks up wasn't just for me. Since I hovered around the door talking with him, I got to the scene a bit later than I wanted. Yet another torn apart body of a monster waited for me. For some reason, this creature smelled minty instead of rotten. A tall man stood beside a woman wearing a suit. I didn't bother reading the names of the agents that would be working with me that day. But I already knew one. His head turned in my direction, sunglasses hiding his eyes. When he saw me, he started to walk in my direction. The woman shouted at him to stop. "Hey Nessie, how are?" I started to ask. Strong arms wrapped around me, pinning my own painfully to my side. I was easily lifted off the ground, getting crushed. At first, I thought he wanted to kill me. But then I clued in Nessie was just giving me a very deadly hug. It took some effort from his partner, but he set me down. I got dizzy from the lack of air and needed a few seconds to recover. Nessie is a bit soft for humans. His partner admitted with a sigh. His hands raised up, wanting another hug. I gave his arm a pat, still wheezing. It was nice to know he wasn't angry at me for what happened to Jackalope. "You're the one dating his previous partner, right?" she asked. "What?" I coughed out, feeling dizzy again for a different reason. It took a few minutes to correct her mistake. Jackalope moved in, but that didn't mean we were dating. Nessie's expression never changed from his stern and almost menacing look. But he almost seemed disappointed in the news. I needed to get them focused on the scene. The female agent introduced herself as Farah. She was the shortest of us, but I suspected her to be the strongest. Her long hair was done up in braids with bright pink beads at the end. Her dark skin contrasted well against the bright tie she picked to wear with her suit. Agents did have strict uniforms, but some simply did not care. Nessie didn't alter his outfit at all, but Farah refused to wear the black tie and socks. I liked her right away. This body is the same as the others you've looked at for us. It's been nice having you teach some agents ways to look over a scene. We all get training, but some of it doesn't stick. Most agents just want to fight. Thinking isn't our strongest skill. Farah explained as I worked on unloading my gear. Nessie stayed silent and nodded. He was built for fighting and not much else. The moment I stopped in front of the body of the creature, I knew right away this scene was different than the others I've worked on. The monster looked to be some sort of werewolf for a better way to describe it. He had stood over 9 feet tall and had black fur. 2 long tails were tangled into each other. The eyes of the wolf had been cut out, leaving gruesome empty sockets. I think whoever killed this monster wasn't the same person as the other missing organ cases. This creature was in a fight before his insides were torn out. The other creatures didn't have any signs of a struggle, showing they were killed very quickly. I explained and nodded at the body and the scene around us. We stood in a clearing in the middle of a forest. Deep cuts from claws were torn into the bark of the trees. Some smaller trees had even been uprooted. I thought I saw some bullet holes in the bark as well, but needed to get closer to confirm. Farah uncrossed her arms and got closer to the body, very interested. Most likely a hunter killed this wolf. The wolf killed humans and used them for magic, so it's reasonable for him to be on a list. We did have our eyes on him, but with so many other cases he wasn't a priority. She explained. A common thing I've heard was just how swamped the corporation was. They needed more manpower that just didn't seem to be available. A thought came to mind, and I let it slip. The mailing company Jackalope started working for repaired his site and gave him a fake arm. How come the corporation didn't? I understand he went against orders to save my life, but with the lack of agents I would think they wouldn't fire them for a single offense, I said, and their expressions changed. Nessie looked away, refusing to show how he felt about the entire thing. Farah bit the bullet to start a difficult conversation. Jackalope is. Well, we're not certain of what he is. When he needed to use his powers, they were often unstable and unreliable. I think Lupa wanted a reason to get rid of him. That and. You see. She paused, unsure of the best way to word her thoughts. If it's confirmed he was made by the methods the corporation suspects, he'll be killed on principle. It sounds harsh, but man, I get it. I like the guy and all, but I really hope he's not what we think he is. I don't know how you could deal with him being in your house if you found out his real origins. Just thinking about it gives me the creeps. Unable to help herself, she hugged her arms, and a slight shake went through her body. She didn't outright say what Jackalope could be. And if I was meant to know, she would have. I felt a small amount of annoyance at her words. A hot feeling came to my stomach and I pushed it down. He saved my life by offering up his own. It's a miracle he didn't die and went go through the company he devoted his life to, rejecting him without complaints. I don't care how he was made. Jackalope is a better person than anyone else I've met. My tone may have come out too harshly. I turned my head away, expecting her to be upset that I snapped a little. Instead, she forced a smile, knowing where I was coming from. Sorry. I get you. It was wrong of me to judge him based on unfounded assumptions. She replied. I wasn't expecting an apology. It made me feel as if I was in the wrong, but we quickly got past the conversation. They both wanted to get the body cleared up so they could move on to a different case. Because a hunter was the most likely suspect, they didn't need the same kind of coverage normal cases did. Rouge hunters killing monsters didn't get a trial like regular humans. I didn't need DNA, or every bullet fired drawn out into a diagram. The fact that this werewolf had been on a list of monsters to be killed helped the hunter's case. If they were caught, the punishment would only be a slap on the wrist for not asking to kill the wolf first. We were able to get the photos and needed documentation fairly quickly. Farah spoke as I worked, and I got her up to speed with what I was doing. She nodded along, but it was easy to tell she was the type to shoot first and ask questions later. At least Nessie was level-headed enough to do any thinking of the pair. He hadn't said a word to me the entire time. I wondered if he couldn't speak or was a bit shy. The final task was removing a dagger sticking out of the neck of the wolf. I found it odd the weapon was left behind or even used in the first place. From what I saw, the hunter favored guns. Such a small dagger didn't seem to be useful, but I wasn't certain if it had been embedded with magic. I almost pulled the dagger out myself and thought better of it. I asked Nessie to do it in case the blade held some sort of power I wasn't aware of. It turns out my suspicions were correct. However, there wasn't anything we could do to avoid the trap the moment we decided to take out that blade. Nessie easily removed the dagger from the dead flesh, and a light came from under our feet. Farah shouted at us to move, but the light grew too intense. The body of the wolf was taken into that light, the spell using up the flesh to gain enough power to transport 3 people to an unknown location. After the flash of light, darkness overtook my vision. I wasn't aware of it, but I passed out to awaken an unknown amount of time later on a cold hard floor. My head swam with pain. It took a few minutes to recover enough to sit up. Whoever tied us up removed my jacket, along with Farah's suit jacket and Nessie's. She was awake, but he hadn't stirred just yet. A thin chain wrapped my wrists. With some effort, I could break through it. I didn't, just in case someone was watching us. All 3 of us were inside a wide circle drawn onto the floor with either red paint or blood. Odd symbols surrounded the circle, making me very scared of what they meant. I didn't want to move in case I set off another trap. The room was dark. Only a single light hung overhead. A few cluttered desks stood around us, covered in weapons and caked with countless blood stains. The cement floor was also stained with old blood. The smell of the dank air turned my stomach. "Are you all right?" I whispered to Farah. She gave me an uneasy smile. She wasn't human and should be the one checking in on the weakest member of the group. She let Nessie keep sleeping as she scanned where we found ourselves. "I can't get my hands free, but I'll figure something out," she admitted in a nervous tone. I gave her a questioning look. Did the person who tied us up use something thicker for her? Since Nessie was on his side, I saw he also had his wrists tied with the same thin loops of a silver chain. Could these 2 not break through silver because they weren't human? The sound of footsteps getting closer made us snap our attention in the other direction. I regretted not snapping the chain the moment I woke up and made a run for one of the weapons. Nessie finally stirred. He slowly sat up, his sunglasses missing to reveal a set of pastel rose eyes. Even in the dangerous situation we were in, I did a double take at them. "I wasn't expecting to catch 3 of you. The more the better, huh?" The man who stepped into the light was not one to mess with. He kept a gun in his hand, a finger very close to the trigger. The hilt of a sword peeked from under his long and filthy coat. His face was covered in old scars and a few new cuts from a recent werewolf fight. His dark eyes stared down at us and his voice held no emotion. This man looked to be a walking corpse. He took a step closer and into the circle. Farah was sweating but tried to hide her stress. "You can let us go. No one is going to be upset you killed that wolf," she started, but I spoke up. "No one is going to come and save us," I said, and it got the hunter's attention. He stared down with a rock-hard expression on his face. Farah looked confused over the conversation. This man didn't kidnap us because he didn't want to get arrested for killing monsters. He hated the supernatural and wanted to kill all of them. He knew his limitations. Instead of killing as many monsters as he could, he decided to take down the most powerful one he could get a hold of. His plan was to kidnap some agents, hoping their boss would swoop in. This guy had no idea Lupo would gladly let us die instead of risking his safety. "Now, how can you be so sure of that?" the hunter asked with a dangerous glint in his eye. "You made some sort of powerful weapon, didn't you? A human has no hope of winning against an office director, or a stronger agent. You would not try to pull this off unless you had an ace up your sleeve." I responded, feeling the air grow tense. The hunter did not like my guess. He raised his gun and fired it toward my face. Farah blocked the bullet, her body between us and her braided hair knocking away 2 more bullets that came. She suddenly was painfully forced down to the ground. Her face twisted in anger and pain. A set of sharp teeth showed through her snarling mouth, wanting to rip the man's face off. This spell suppresses supernatural creatures, especially if they have a murderous intent. "You won't be able to move while you want to kill me," the man said, not sounding very impressed. He turned his attention towards Nessie, who remained calm the entire interaction. My stomach turned as he got closer to my agent friend and Nessie started to back up. He was stopped at the edge of the circle, unable to go any further. "You're right. I did create a weapon. Swords like these are easy to make, but most choose not to use them. I can kill any creature, within reason, at the cost of my own life. Your boss should be easy enough to take down," the hunter said, and gave me a quick look from over his shoulder. "Why do this? I know you hate monsters, but the corporation fights against them. They may not be human, but they're on your side." I argued, "Do you really believe that? The corporation was made by the Silver King to keep the balance. But what even is that balance? From what I've seen, things are very fucking unfair. There is no balance. That king favors creatures and wants to keep the biggest population of them possible by letting them feed on humans. Monsters only get punished if they eat too many resources." I started to feel sick at his words. I didn't have any proof to what he was saying was wrong. It was all a possibility. And I hated how true the theory sounded. Regardless, I needed to get both Farah and Nessie out of there. They were both good people who didn't deserve to be used as bait, or worse. The hunter still had a gun in his hand. I worked at breaking the chain, keeping my arms behind my back without being obvious. If he looked in my direction at the wrong time, I risked getting my face blown off. As carefully as possible, I shifted around, almost able to snap the chain. The hunter reached into his coat to bring out a small metal tube. He pressed his thumb against the bottom, causing a long needle to shoot out. The sharp point stopped half an inch away from Nessie's eye. I saw the agent start to sweat and breathe heavily, but he didn't dare move. A choking fear pooled in my heart. My eyes were looking for a weapon to grab before the hunter had a chance to fire his gun. I heard you're a shy one. You'll give me better reactions than the woman over there. I'll only use you for a few photos, then I'll be kind enough to end your life. The hunter spoke, words cold as ice. He lowered the metal tip and easily took off Nessie's top button. I found myself grinding my teeth trying to stay calm. If I didn't plan out my movements, we would all be dead. Another button came off and my face flushed with rage. The shirt was parted just enough to show a set of pastel emerald scales over Nessie's collarbone. My new friend met my eyes, his face faltered for a second. The needle tip went to open his shirt further and he turned his head away in shame, lips pressed in a tight line. I could not stay calm. Without a second thought, I snapped the silver chain to charge at the hunter. I caught him off guard. His frame was larger than mine, so I didn't do much when I rammed into his back. He dropped his gun but brought the metal needle around to painfully bring it down into my shoulder. I screamed and put everything I had into pushing him out of the circle and away from the two agents. He tripped, causing us to pile into each other. This man trained his body against fighting monsters for years. But he wasn't expecting someone to fight dirty. I didn't have the same strength, so resorted to biting, wild punches, and hair pulling. He was more annoyed than hurt. I found my body getting tossed aside and rolling hard against a table. A large hammer fell to the ground in front of my face. I snatched it up and got a good hit on the other man's hand before he could reach for another weapon. The hammer came down as fast as I could manage. Some swings hit home, while others did not. He fell back against another work table, his bleeding hand finding a half-finished wooden staff. I wasn't able to dodge a few blows to my face from that. We both backed off, panting, in pain and bleeding. His eyes wild and confused. I'd broken through a silver chain and a circle that was meant to hold supernatural creatures. He never once considered I may be human. In his mind, I was a powerful creature he'd never faced before. His hand flew to his side to the sword that was meant for Lupa's life. The unknown factor caused him to act in a way he normally wouldn't. Farah screamed, unable to do anything to help. The hunter charged forwards, the delicate sword pointing directly at my stomach. I didn't move out of the way soon enough. The tip of the blade pressed against my skin, and then a burst of power exploded from it. We were all knocked back, the blade shattering into pieces and gauging the cement floor as they flew off. The sword was meant to kill any supernatural creature at the cost of the life who used it. It turns out, wording mattered a lot when it came to magic. I wasn't a creature, so the spell broke. The magic blew back in all of our faces, disorienting the four of us. I stood up, ears ringing and eyesight slowly returning to normal. Farah was finally shaking off the spell that kept her bound. She was on one knee shouting something. Nessie started moving but got to his target far too late. Wording with magic spells may fail you, but bullets always did their job. I heard a pop. The hunter got blown back and landed next to his gun. He grabbed it, rolled over, and fired. Nessie's body exploded outwards into a large creature. A clawed hand came down on the hunter, pinning him to the ground before he could fire again. I stood in awe, seeing a real living creature for the first time. They really were something else when they still breathed instead of the corpses I've dealt with so far. Nessie looked to be some sort of dragon that nearly took up the entire room. His wings pinned close to his body shimmered a dazzling green. His face hidden under long hair that looked like wet seaweed. A set of light pink eyes stared in my direction. Somehow, his monstrous face looked concerned. It wasn't until my legs gave out from under me that I realized why. Warm blood poured down from my stomach. I made a weak attempt at putting pressure on the wound. Darkness started at the corners of my vision as I fell. Farah caught me before I smashed my face against the hard ground. For being so strong, she was a very soft person. When my eyes opened again, I felt heavy. My head refused to move, and my stomach hurt. It took me a few minutes to gather myself enough to look around where I'd been taken. The room looked like one in a small clinic. Someone worked away at some paperwork at a small desk next to my bed. I didn't lift my head, only looked over. Can I touch your cheek? My voice sounded raspy, but it was worth asking. The person turned their head, a very cute smile on their face. They wore gender-neutral blue scrubs, but I assumed they might be male. Their body was made of some sort of pale transparent material. The light shone off the surface in an appealing way. I really wanted to know what their skin felt like but thought it may be too personal of a question to ask to take their hand. I'm Robin, and yes you may because you asked nicely. They reached over to help me sit up and gave me a cup of water. After Robin knew, I wasn't going to pass out again. They let me poke their cheek. It was a nice texture that would make a perfect stress ball. You were shot, and we were forced to use some vampire blood to heal you. It burns up your body fat and only heals the life-threatening injuries first. I would like you to rest for another few hours, but you're free to go home whenever. Lots of bed rest and a high-calorie diet to recover the weight, Robin said. I raised my hand to feel my still bruised face. I was thankful for not having a bullet wound but felt a bit bitter over still having all the other cuts and bruises. I did lose a lot of weight. My arms looked thinner than ever before Jackalope arrived to start cooking dinner for us. Jackalope can handle the food. I swear, I've never eaten 3 meals a day until he showed up. I mentioned. I spoke with him. It was a bit unprofessional, but your phone kept ringing. You don't have an emergency contact, so I just told him you were held back due to work. If he's your partner, you should update your contact. Roommate. I corrected Robin. The creature gave me a cryptic smile but accepted the answer. My phone was handed over and I couldn't bring myself to send a message or call. I didn't want to worry him, but Jackalope was going to find out what happened after he saw how bad my face looked when I got home. A message came through and I saw someone added Nessie to my phone. He may be shy in person, but he texted a lot. And with a lot of cute faces and icons, I didn't even know how he made them. I swear I saw an uwu in his messages and I needed to look up what that meant. I was so traumatized by his texting style it took me a few minutes to recover and ask other questions I had. Do you know what's going to happen to that hunter? I asked, wondering how badly Nessie hurt him. I think Nessie acted first because he knew if Farah got a hold of the man, she would have killed him. It's hard to say. I think in this case the Silver King is going to look over it and decide what to do. Neither organization can come to an impartial decision, Robin said while they pressed a pen to their bottom lip. I assumed the Silver King was too powerful to bother with such small cases. I hoped he went easy on the man. I wanted to hate him for threatening Nessie and Farah, but I couldn't bring myself to. That man must have been through a lot to dedicate his entire life to hatred. Or maybe I just didn't want him to die because we were both human. The hunter said something that's bothered me about the corporation. I started and Robin knew where I was going. They set the pen down to give me their entire attention. They'd heard this theory before and knew it had been the cause of so many supernatural deaths. Some justified, and others not so much. If a hunter came across Robin, they risked getting killed because of the conspiracy some hurt and confused humans cooked up. It's very hard to prove a negative. There is a balance only the Silver King can understand fully. After what those hunters have been through, it's easy for them to see the world as completely against them. Yes, all creatures have a limit on how many humans they can kill given to them by the Silver King. If they go over that limit, they are punished. The corporation was created by our king because no matter how powerful, he is just a single person. He cannot be in 2 places at once. So, he delegated tasks. Then the corporation started to take matters into its own hands. Their goal is to ensure there are no more unneeded deaths of humans by supernatural means. Most agents work because it's seen as an honorable position acting out the king's will. But others do the job for a simple fact most people tend to overlook. I listened to Robin, and he didn't even need to tell me the rest. I already knew what he was going to say after meeting with so many agents. 6 talked to me and told me information when he didn't need to. Nessie sent messages worried about my well-being, and Farah wanted to kill a man because he threatened my life. There were some creatures out there that didn't respect human life. Like Lupa, who only cared about the respect his job would bring, or the god who killed for no other reason than he could. Those kinds of creatures were the reason why the hunters existed. Most agents save humans because they want you to live. Robin finished. A round face squished into a grin. There wasn't any proof that these creatures weren't using us for livestock. But I trusted that smile. Even if my entire race was simply allowed to live to feed another species, I was fine with that. It meant people I cared about kept living. I knew that was a selfish way to see things and, at that moment, didn't care. This is a bit off topic, but has Jackalope received a new arm recently? Robin brought up. The mention of the new arm got me worried. There was a chance of the arm getting rejected and I feared Jackalope may be at a higher risk for such a thing for a reason I wasn't aware of. Is it going to fall off? I asked, worry clear in my voice. I hope not. But please keep an eye on him. Come to the clinic if you have any worries, or if any kind of new symptoms appears. We would rather see you 100 times for nothing than you need us and not show up one time. Both of you need plenty of rest, good food, and light exercise. You're only roommates, right? I'll need to think of suggestions to keep you active while recovering, Robin said and turned away back to his forms. I wasn't able to ask him to elaborate on what he wanted to suggest exercise-wise because Farah came barging in. She gave me a crushing hug and apologized for the fact I got shot. I'd almost forgotten about all of that. We got her settled down and I was glad she came by. I had some questions for her. I saw something in my place the other night. I'm worried it was the same god that took Jackalope's arm. Is there a way to confirm that? Or get rid of him if it is a god bothering us? I asked her thinking that she might know more about supernatural solutions than myself. She frowned and crossed her arms. Robin also sat thinking, fiddling with a pen. Well, gods don't live on this level of existence. They can interact through emotions, prayers, and thoughts. I think Jackalope told you to keep talking about those deaths, right? That gave the god more power to act. I know this sounds lame, but just don't think about it. Get a hobby. Focus on something else. You have a really cute ex-agent in your house. I'm surprised you two haven't been too busy with each other to even worry about this, she said in a casual tone. What? What does that mean? We're just roommates. I corrected her. My ears felt so hot it made the rest of my body cold. Is this how everyone at the corporation saw our living arrangement? Just roommates. Robin chipped in, hoping that helped. I'm just messing with you, Farah said like a liar. I wanted to call her out but felt too tired to care. She agreed to help me get home. I really didn't know where this clinic was located. For all I knew, I ended up in a different country. With some magic, Farah dropped us off in front of my house. She gave me her number to ask her any questions that may come to mind. I was barely inside the front door when Jackalope reached me with 2 rabbits at his heels. Houdini warmed up to pesto so well. I'm glad we got the cute little black rabbit. I bent down to pick them up so their soft fur could relax my fried nerves. A smell coming from the kitchen caused me to freeze and I didn't even hear what Jackalope said for a few seconds. Are you cooking menudo? I asked him, handing over a rabbit. I found a recipe book while cleaning the kitchen. I wanted to try and make something different. He admitted, a bit confused over my shock. That must have been my mother's. I told him and took a few steps inside the house. I hadn't smelled that meal in years. Not since she passed away. When she got sick, she needed to stop cooking. I always regretted the fact I burned everything I made so she couldn't have the meal she enjoyed near the end. Jackalope noticed my expression and carefully put pesto down. The rabbit hopped away ready to create chaos. Houdini kept him in line after we paired them up, but alone he was a nightmare. Should I have not cooked? Jackalope started, but I shook my head. No. It's nice. I think I would like it if you cooked anything my mother wrote down. But you need to let me start helping out around the house. It's pretty bad I'm letting you do everything. Since Jackalope recovered enough to start moving around on his own, he took over the chores. I'd taken care of myself for years and now I didn't know how I functioned without him. I'd been taking advantage of my new roommate. I like cooking and doing chores. When I worked as an agent, I moved around a lot. Mostly living out of hotels or small rooms just for resting in the office. A normal life is something I never dreamed of having. It's nice. I didn't consider any of that. He never had a stable life until he moved in. I considered doing laundry a chore, but he saw it as a privilege. It only cost him an arm and a torn face. I didn't want to bring up those facts. For once I was hungry after work. I could eat seconds and Jackalope made enough food to feed 10 people. A paper towel with a pile of half-chewed sucker sticks sat on the counter. Jackalope noticed them and quickly cleaned up his mess. That pile was the only sign of how much he fretted after calling and not getting an answer. He only chewed his chupa chups when he was anxious. You lost a lot of weight. Did they need to use some vampire blood on you? With humans, it burns fat and muscles. You must have broken something for them to give it to you, Jackalope said as he dished out a large portion of food for the both of us. Oh, that. I was shot, but it's not a big deal. It healed up, no problem. I took the hot bowl and did a small taste. It wasn't the same as how my mother cooked it, but it was still pretty good. I was about to sit down to eat when I noticed Jackalope staring in my direction. Without a word he swiftly turned on his heels heading towards the door. It took me far too long to clue into what he was doing. I chased after him and needed to drag him back into the kitchen to eat inside of charging out the door to try and find the hunter that nearly killed his roommate. In fact, it took him a lot to keep him settled down and eating dinner. Compared to the other things I've come across so far, getting shot wasn't at the top of the list of the most terrifying ordeals. Finding out Nessie texted like a 13-year-old girl was right under dealing with a dark god. Jackalope wasn't happy with how many times I've nearly died on a job that shouldn't deal with such dangerous interactions. At least he didn't ask me to quit. The money was too good. I may consider it in a few more jobs. If I lived through a few more. We both needed some rest after dinner. At least the boys stayed out of trouble. We let them free roam in the living room while we were home. Since there was a small empty bedroom, we converted it into their area. From a shelter to an entire room to explore. These rabbits got spoiled. They put up a bit of a fit getting put away for the night but fell asleep quickly afterward. When the weather got nicer, they could roam around in a pen in the backyard. I felt exhausted but didn't want to go to sleep. The image of the dark figure in my doorway still haunted my thoughts. So much for not giving that stupid god power. Getting shot wasn't enough to take my mind off what lurked in the night. I double-checked that Jackalope was asleep with his rabbit light on. It then took every ounce of willpower to turn off all the lights in my bedroom and firmly lock the door. I hid under the blankets, and a block of ice settled into my core. I didn't sleep that first night. No matter how much I wanted to ignore it, I sensed someone watching my back. A slow raspy breathing got closer and closer to my ear until I felt a small puff of air brush against my skin. I gritted my teeth waiting for the bastard to do anything, or for the sun to finally rise. That damn god didn't end my life that night. He wanted to keep messing with us. If it took his attention of Jackalope, then I would take it. I really needed to recover enough to take my mind off that darkness. Even if that meant I could end up getting shot again. I work as a CSI. Part 6. A small town murder. I've been exhausted from not sleeping when an odd call came. It was only 2 days after the Hunter ordeal. The cuts and bruises looked better but were still healing. I assumed the call to be for another job, but for some reason I'd been asked to meet with the Hunter that almost took my life. He was the one who requested the meeting, and I could refuse. Jackalope wasn't very keen on the fact I accepted, but he didn't try to stop me from leaving that day. I was swept away to a very plain building where the man was being held. It wasn't a prison. It looked more like a mixture of an office building and apartments. They didn't even ask me to remove any metal or dangerous items. Soon, I found myself sitting across from a man who shot me. The room was empty besides a table between us. His face also started healing up from the few good hits I'd gotten in during our fight. His hands bound with simple cuffs. There wasn't anyone inside the room beside us, but I knew this meeting was being watched in some way. I learned his name was Sebastian. They did not tell me his last name for some reason. "Are they treating you well?" I asked, unsure of where to start. He nodded, refusing to meet my eyes. He fiddled with his hands and his foot tapped against the floor. I didn't have the slightest clue what he wanted to see me about. He chewed on his lip for a while. Just as I was about to leave, he spoke. "You're human, right?" he said in a low voice. It sounded like he hadn't been drinking enough water. I worried he didn't trust the food or drink here. He did think the corporation was only killing monsters that ate too much, and not for the overall good of the human race. "Yeah. It's the reason why your magic sword didn't work," I answered. I wondered what might happen to him now. No one had given me a straight answer on his future. They did want to offer him a job hunting down monsters for the corporation, but I highly doubted he would accept. There was hope that after he'd been arrested that the mysterious death of the monster's missing organs would stop. He'd only been locked away for a day before yet another murdered monster was found. That proved he wasn't responsible for the rest of the murders and only killed the werewolf as a trap. "Why are you working with them?" the man pressed, finally looking in my direction. "I know how you feel about the corporation. I don't like parts of it either. A supernatural creature saved my life and it led me down this path." I started. He didn't like the answer and scowled. Shaking his head, his foot tapped harder against the ground, clearly annoyed I let him down in some way. "They set you up. They wanted something and tricked you into being loyal. They just..." Jackalope offered his life to save mine. He was willing to die for a stranger. It's a miracle he's alive and only lost an arm. I cut in sternly. His foot tapping stopped. Sebastian stared me down with dark, tired eyes looking for a lie. When he saw nothing but the truth, I saw gears turning in his head. He didn't want to admit there might be good monsters out there. He needed to believe that all supernatural creatures were bloodthirsty monsters because he'd killed so many without a second thought. If there was a decent creature, that meant he may have killed a good person at some point. I don't have any proof of what I'm saying. And I won't sit here judging you for your actions. There must have been a good reason for you to go down the path you choose. I told him. He refused to look at me as I spoke. His eyes set on the floor as if he could drown out his thoughts. He dug the tips of his fingernails under each other, making me wince. I wasn't wrong. They needed to die. I was never wrong. He muttered to himself. I don't think you were ever wrong. I'm not angry about what you did. A little on Nessie's behalf, but I just feel as if you're hurting yourself more than the creatures you hunted. His tapping stopped again. Soon his shoulders started to tremble as he buried his head into his hands. He looked so worn down and broken at that moment. His body became strong for hunting creatures, but the moment he stopped to look at what he was doing, he nearly shattered. They killed my daughter. Ate her. What else was I supposed to do? Sebastian said, his voice hoarse and barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I fully meant those words. I couldn't offer anything else. There was no right answer when it came to all of this. Humans and the supernatural couldn't coexist without there being causalities. Sebastian was one of them. I considered if it would be better if our two species never interacted. The creatures would starve, but there would be no little girls getting eaten. No gods killing loved ones. And no need for agents to give up their arms to the darkness. A tap on the door signaled the meeting was over. I stood up but told Sebastian we could talk whenever he wanted. I didn't know if he wanted to ever see me again or disappear back into the frame of mind that kept him going. Everything was much easier to deal with when you thought every monster was a killer. I walked down the hallway but was stopped by someone. A tall man came in my direction. He barely looked like an adult. His white hair was cut short at the sides and wavy at the front. He wore a baggy sweater that made him appear thinner. Old scars circled his entire neck as if someone tried cutting his head off with a wire and failed. He had a calm smile that overpowered the fear I got when I saw his red eyes. Thank you for meeting with him. I'm the one in charge of his case. It must have been hard on both of you. The newcomer said in a kind tone. Didn't Robin mention that the Silver King was the one who would look over Sebastian's case? I looked him up and down, deciding he did not give off the air of an all-powerful creature all others bowed down to. What's going to happen to him? I asked. Well, therapy to start. Aside from that, it's up to him. We'll provide all his needs. I don't think someone can recover from what he's been through. He has support from us no matter what happens. He explained as he brushed some hair from his eyes. He was a hunter. He killed monsters. And there is no way to prove all the ones he killed deserved it. The ones he did wrong are just going to take care of him as if that never happened? I asked, really hoping that would be the case. The man paused to think. He had his hands behind his back, and he rocked on his heels for a few seconds. A monster killed his family. He killed monsters. If we killed him, that would feed into an endless cycle. Some say it would balance things out, but I hate balanced things. Being balanced isn't always the right answer. We'll take care of him. He's gone through enough, he doesn't need to deal with more monsters. I wanted to respond, but he heard his name being called from down the hallway. He was a very busy person. He thanked me again for coming by that day and hurried off to do whatever he needed to. The meeting was depressing, but at least it gave me a break from Jackalope forcing food on me to gain some weight. By the time my injuries finally healed, I was ready to get back to work. The lights stayed on at night, but I still didn't sleep much. There hadn't been any sightings of whatever haunted the dark, but I still didn't want to risk turning off the lights just yet. I wondered if Jackalope was sleeping all right. He acted a bit slower than normal but just said he'd been doing a lot of running at work. A job request came in and of course, Jackalope said I wasn't ready to go back. I brushed off his worries. If I stayed inside the house for too long, I may go insane. I quickly found out I didn't really like any movies or shows on my handful of streaming services. Reading put me to sleep and Jackalope beat me to cleaning most of the house. The only choice was to accept the first job that came my way. I ended up in a town so small a single police department of 3 oversaw the entire population. The job was simple. A woman was found dead, and they needed someone to record the scene. They also requested I train 2 of the officers up on some new databases along with reviewing how to deal with murder scenes. They didn't have them often and needed a refresher. I would not be working with an agent, which made me nervous. But I was given my CSI jacket that had some mild magic protection. My jacket also helped with the insanely low temperatures. Cold weather and I did not mix well. I huddled under my jacket shivering. The corporation provided a rented car and dumped me into a snow-covered town, trusting I found my way around. With a lot of backtracking, I found the dirt road leading to a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. An officer met me outside. He waited for a long time and was a bit annoyed by how long I took. He was ridiculously tall. His skin dark and hair black. He didn't smile but held out a hand for me to shake when I arrived. "I'm Yates. You're the Fed, right?" he asked after we shook hands. His voice low and raspy as if he had a cold. My cover story was that I worked with the FBI to recover evidence because the murder was suspected to be part of an ongoing investigation. I flashed the fake badge I'd been given to sell that story a bit better. Yates did not like the fact that someone swooped in to take over a murder scene in his town. He showed a coldness that matched the weather. "I'm here to help. I'll gather what I need." I wished I was notified before the body had been collected. I admitted looking over his shoulder and towards the house. The body had been found outside, torn apart and half-eaten. The blood remained for me to document along with anything else I may find. The front door was open when the body had been found but had since been closed to stop snow from entering the house. Yates gave me the basic rundown of what happened before I arrived. Another officer named Maggie had been the one to find the poor dead girl. They had been friends, so Yates took over meeting me and guarding the scene. Maggie and Yates were the ones who needed the lesson when we got back to the department. He warned me she was very stressed out after what she saw and might not be the best student. I asked him about tire tracks, who walked over the scene, and what kind of wildlife may be in the area. He provided a photo of the bite marks on the body. I wasn't aware of any animal that may have eaten half a body in such a way. As I got started on the scene, I didn't see any tracks in the knee-deep snow of an animal coming from the woods. So far, there had only been some tire tracks, and a path made by an unknown number of people through the snow and toward the front of the house. The lack of tracks from the woods made me think that something not natural was the cause of the death. Yates did a good job documenting the scene before I arrived. I wanted to get out of the cold wind and snow as soon as possible. My hands shook, making it hard to write down notes and keep my camera steady. A gust of wind made me flinch and turn my head away. When I opened my eyes, I stared off into the nearby forest. I could have sworn I saw a set of eyes staring back. A hot puff of air hit the back of my neck. I knew right away it wasn't the wind. "Agent, leave." The two words were nothing but a hoarse whisper. I turned as fast as possible to see nothing. Yates stood near his patrol car still, not noticing anything. I wasn't sure if I imagined the voice, but the fear felt real. I took the words as a threat. I could listen to the warning, or I could finish up my job. Within the hour we were driving back to the department ready to start the training so I could leave. A blast of heat hit my face the moment we walked into the building. The cold from my face faded within seconds of being inside. If I didn't take off my jacket, I would have died from a heat stroke. "Sorry, the heater's broken. I take it you're the guy helping us on Laura's case?" The only female officer met us by the door. She helped with my jacket on reflex to hang it up by the door. The building only had a main room, an office, and jail cells in the back. The computers looked to be at least 15 years old. At least they still worked. I introduced myself to Maggie, who tried her best to appear upbeat. Her mood was forced, which was understandable. She was pretty in a plain way. A round face with messy blonde hair tied back. If she smiled, she would look like the perfect girl next door. A man came out of the only enclosed office. He also wore a uniform that he kept buttoned up as if he was affected by the heat of the building. "So, you're the Fed. I didn't know they came in your color," he said in a deep voice. I bristled at the comment but kept calm. The man was the sheriff of the small town. He looked like any backwoods cop should. Overweight, too old for the job, and a mysterious food stain on his shirt. I glanced over at Yates, who gave the man an open glare. I bet he got the same kind of abuse from this man due to his darker skin tone. "Good thing you're retiring, or else comments like that would get you fired," Yates hissed in his raspy voice. The sheriff crossed his arms, ready for a fight. A handgun was a clear threat on his belt. Thank God Maggie was good at dealing with these two. She quickly brought attention away from the future fight. "This is Ward. He does like to say things to mess with people. As Yates said, he'll be retiring soon. Let's get started on that training so you can hurry on home." Maggie guided us to the computer desk, and thankfully the two men didn't get into it again. Ward refused to join us and locked himself away in his office. I didn't want to bring up the tense work environment. We just focused on getting the computer software up to speed, and the two officers caught up on a lot of protocols they lacked. Yates was quiet, but he understood the material. Maggie needed some extra help and acted a bit embarrassed by it. She didn't have a cell phone until recently, so all of this was pretty new to her. It was taking longer than expected, but I wasn't upset over that fact. I just would be late for dinner. As we worked away, I noticed the weather outside had gotten bad. Sheets of snow made the world outside appear to be pure white. The wind blew hard, and I was glad to be inside a warm building. Just as I wanted to wrap things up for the day, an alarm went off. Maggie flew into action and raced towards the noise with Yates close behind. I smelled the reason for the alarm and followed them. I paused in the doorway that led to the back cells. A small fire started on the beds inside the second of the two cells. Maggie grabbed an extinguisher to easily put out the small flames. We all looked at each other, very puzzled over how such a fire started. I noticed something the others hadn't. The fire burned an almost perfect circle in the middle of the bed. Something clicked in my head, and I turned on my heels to go to the front door. Maggie asked questions as I left. Ward came out of his office and watched me pause at the front door. My CSI jacket with my cell phone missing with a small fading circle on the hook it had been placed on. I then braved the storm outside long enough to confirm that our cars were missing. Yates grabbed my shoulder to drag me back inside. My clothing was covered in snow from being outside for under a minute. "What's going on?" Maggie asked, confused. "The cars are gone. Check the phones," I told her as I went over to the computer. "Gone? What are you on about?" Ward asked, huffing towards the door. Maggie checked the first phone near her, and when she didn't even hear a dial tone, she moved on to the next one. The computer screen turned to static, then died the moment I went over to it. Ward didn't want to believe the cards had been stolen. He was convinced I just didn't see them through the snow. No one went to force him back inside. He spent the next 10 minutes going inside and out in denial. Yates and Maggie both owned cell phones. They both died like the computer. I've seen this before. I made the mistake of bringing along my personal cell phone to a scene with a monster corpse. It was fried in seconds from the magic still in the air. Someone here started the fire with magic to distract us away from the missing cars, and my jacket being stolen. Whoever did so, was strong enough to be able to control their magic so the computer didn't die sooner. And they knew who I worked for. But they assumed I was an agent instead of just a human CSI worker. "Seriously, what's going on?" Maggie asked, unable to keep the fear from her voice. I couldn't answer her. Someone here wasn't human and kept us trapped for a reason I wasn't certain of just yet. Maggie was either very good at acting, or just as scared as I was. I considered Yates, but he hadn't moved to the farmhouse when I heard that voice. I wasn't even entirely sure if that voice warning me to leave had anything to do with this case. I hadn't been sleeping well and could have been hearing things. Ward didn't seem to be the supernatural type, but he'd acted the most hostile out of all of them so far. I just didn't have enough information to make the call. All I could do was wait. "Someone is going to notice they can't get through to us and come to get us," I said to Maggie, but that thought didn't comfort her. "I'll make some coffee," Yates announced. It kept him busy while Ward cursed and swore at our current situation. He yelled, demanding answers. When none were given, he stormed back into his office. He slammed the door so hard I thought the glass may break. Without anything else to do, I sat down to look over the case I'd been called to document. Maggie settled down with a mug of coffee in her hand. She came over to look over my shoulder. I quickly flipped over the photo of her friend's dead body and looked up at her. "I'm sorry for what happened to her. Do you have any ideas on who would do this?" I asked her. She gave a weak smile, appreciating someone cared about the poor girl's death. "Not a clue. Everyone loved her. She fell on some hard times money-wise, but she owed money to the bank. No one else. But we think she was ambushed by some animal. After all, what else would?" She stopped talking, her face pale. I let her look away, but the expression on her face went beyond sadness. Her friend was killed and then her body was torn up. It was as if she had seen something. I gestured for her to sit next to me, unsure of how to approach this topic. "Are there any urban legends around here? Like Dogmen or Bigfoot?" I asked in a hushed tone. If Yates heard, he didn't care. Maggie searched through her head but came up empty. "Nothing much. We had a rumor of a serial killer, but nothing that might try and eat a person," she explained. As she spoke, I took a piece of scrap paper and acted like I was taking notes. Instead of that, I wrote her a message. "Did you see something?" She quickly read over my question. Face paler than ever. As she kept talking, she wrote down her response in a way no one else in the office would see. "Monster. It wore a uniform jacket." She handed back the paper and did another check to make sure we weren't caught passing notes. No wonder she acted so stressed out. When she discovered the body, she saw something eating her friend. A creature that wore the same uniform as herself. I don't know what happened or how she got away. Maggie acted relaxed and calm around Yates, so she must have a reason to not suspect him. But now we were all stuck with a possible creature just waiting to do what? What did that monster want? I did consider Maggie might have been lying. If she was the creature, she could be trying to pin her crimes on her coworkers. She knew I wasn't a normal CSI worker. If she was human, She would see me as her only source of help. If she wasn't human, she warned me to focus my attention on the other two. This all gave me a bit of a headache trying to think through it. I let her stand up to get more coffee. The note was hidden in my pocket. As the hours passed, the world outside turned darker. But not completely black due to the snow. I kept trying the phones hoping I could reach someone. "Shouldn't your agency be looking for you?" Yates offered as I was trying the phone again. "No, I'm not that high of a priority. I want to call my roommate though. He must be getting worried." I answered back knowing no one from the corporation would be looking for someone like me. "Roommate?" Yates asked as if that meant something. "Just a roommate," I said back, a bit annoyed people kept asking that. At least he dropped it. Maggie found a couch to try and sleep on. Wards kept going in and out of his office complaining that we hadn't been found yet. We all knew not to try and talk him down. He would only get more upset if we made any attempts to explain why a snowplow hadn't come by yet. This is insulting. I'm the sheriff. And my family were the first to be in the crappy town. We build the damn thing, and this is how we're repaid? Someone should have been here hours ago. And who could even steal our cars to start with? He ranted while pacing with red cheeks. "It's not as if you have too many friends," Yates said, not caring that he would start another rant. "When you're a good sheriff, you make enemies. I get this is all some sort of prank bullshit some kids are playing for their goddamn cell phone videos. If I find out you're behind this." More of the same came out of his mouth for a full hour. Yates only added some fuel to the fire, but never enough to make the older man snap. I wondered what he was up to until Ward finally went back to his office exhausted to sleep on a couch. I figured Ward was the type of man that slept at the office fairly often. Yates wanted to turn in himself. He found a chair big enough to take a nap in, but that left me without a place to rest. Maggie already passed out on the couch, and I refused to move her. Yates offered to let me sleep in one of the cells if I held onto the key. I agreed, knowing trying to figure all of this out while tired would be useless. Besides the smell, the cells weren't the worst place to sleep. Questions turned in my head. I couldn't figure any of this out just yet. I did try to get some rest, but my mind refused to stop working. I glanced over towards the doorway to see Yates with his back towards the cells in a chair. He passed out as if that was an easy thing to do. I stayed on the stiff cell bed with my eyes closed to trick my brain into sleeping.